Sometimes I wish, and I'm saying this seriously, that we too had a nuclear weapon, because that is what Europe and America understands. We are now in a neo-colonial stage when the European powers are at their most diabolical, when the Americans are at their most diabolical. And how do they interfere? They interfere militarily, they interfere diplomatically, sometimes through gunboat diplomacy. And that is why you see sometimes your typical European ambassador treats our heads of states in a condescending manner. They interfere through institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank, UKAID, USAID, Danida, SIDA. These are Trojan horses that are introduced into our countries for the purpose of influencing our processes.
Hello good people, hello brothers and sisters, welcome to the channel, and I hope you're doing great. You're safe from wherever you're watching this video from. As usual, welcome back to the channel for another interesting video. In this particular video, we want to talk about why Africa really desperately and quickly needs a strategy, a good, clear strategy of unity when it comes to dealing with the rest of the world. At this particular time, this is very important, because when you see how things are turning out or panning out in the world today, if we are not careful as Black people and as Africans, there could be a second scramble for Africa. So we need to be very careful, and we need to be, proactive ahead of time, if we have to prevent what is happening, what could happen. So family, let's be honest, Africa is actually standing at a crossroad today. The rest of the world, whether it is the West, the East, or even other emerging blocs, already have a game plan, when it comes to Africa. But does Africa have a plan even for herself? The rest of the world knows what they want from us, our resources, our markets, our geopolitical positioning. But the question is, what is Africa's plan? Where is our unified strategy that says this is how to deal with the rest of the world on our own terms? You see, I have always insisted that nobody loves you better than you can love yourself. Now, I want us to take a minute to listen to one Pan-Africanist here, son of the soil, one professor, brother, Professor Lumumba. He's going to really give us some very useful insights on the same. And at the end of this video, we will be back with a good analysis of what we will learn from him. If you're new to the channel, welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here, and please subscribe to the channel to become a part of us. So I'll see you on the other side.
It's a new scramble for Africa. The Chinese are here, the Turks are here, the Qataris are here. All of them are coming back, and the military bases that you see here is telling you that if you don't behave, we are going to use force. Sometimes I wish, and I'm saying this seriously, that we too had a nuclear weapon, because that is what Europe and America understands. The impact of European and American and Russian and Chinese interference is a raw wound. It is not something that is in the past. It is something that is happening as we speak. And therefore, when we speak to it, we are speaking to it to warn ourselves of the reality. When we speak about the Danidas and the NGOs, these are bodies whose raison d'etre is to ensure that we remain in a perpetual state of begging. That is what we are doing, to warn ourselves. And we are not for 1 minute saying that we will shut ourselves out from the rest of the world. What we are saying is that we must define how we engage with the whole world. And we are saying that as individual countries, we are weak, and the rest of the world wants to operate and to deal with us in our weak state. The United States of America are dealing with Rwanda on second-hand clothing. Rwanda cannot resist them. Burundi cannot. Kenya cannot. Uganda cannot. But if we are East Africa with a population of 300 million, we can. If we are SADC, we can. If we are ECOWAS, we can. So this is what we are saying. And we are saying further that going forward, we must also recognize our internal weaknesses. And what is our weaknesses? Chinua Achebe said it very well. The problem of Africa is simply and squarely one of political leadership. The rank of many political leaders in Africa are thieves. Let's call them by their name. They are thieves. They are individuals who are not interested in the interest of this country. And as long as we continue electing such individuals into positions of power across Africa, they are going to be manipulated. What then is the responsibility of the citizenry? The responsibility of the citizenry is to make demands. The chairman here, I hope he has received the several letters that I have written to him. I've written several letters to his organization talking about the role of the African Union in peacemaking. I wrote to the chairman only last week about the situation in Sudan, saying we must solve our own problems. And I want to see a crusading African Union, so that it's not the Americans and the Saudi Arabians who are summoning them to Jeddah. It should be in Addis Ababa. In a nutshell, Joe, what I'm saying is that we have a responsibility to ourselves, both at the leadership level and at levels of the civic society. We must be engaged in a positive manner, and we must keep on shouting without being diplomatic, because diplomacy is lulling us into a false sense of security. And lastly, I want to say this. When foreign powers come, we must always be reminded of these goodies that they bring to us. It used to be said of the Trojan War that even when the Greeks bear a gift, they do not mean well. They never mean well. And the sooner we say it, recognizing the external threat, recognizing the domestic weaknesses, the safer we are. Right now, as I conclude, there is a group of experts going around East Africa collecting views about the constitution of East Africa. I've just written to them this morning. They are leaving Kenya. If you ask 10 Kenyans, possibly only one knows they're in Kenya. Then they will be going to Burundi. If you ask your typical African about Africa Agenda 2063 out of 10, if 2 know about Africa Agenda 2063, you'll be lucky. If you ask them about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area 10, if 2 know, you'll be lucky. In other words, we are not doing well. And I'm going to be blunt at these functions. If you ask the chair of the African Union who funds the African Union, possibly 60% of the budget is externally funded. He who pays the piper calls the tune. That is the reality of the world. We must begin to pay for our own things in order to be understood and to be respected. In other words, Africa recognizes the need to define herself and to define her agenda. And I do not begrudge nations that define themselves and their agenda. Ronald Reagan once said it, and I agreed with him, that every nation does what is in her best interest. And I have no problem with that. The problem that we have is that at critical moments in African history, we have failed to seize the moment. You will remember in 1917 at the Champaran campaign, Mahatma Gandhi told Charlie Andrews, I do not want you to participate because at this point in time, the Indians must believe that they can do it themselves. In other words, there comes a time in the history of a nation when even friends of goodwill must be told, keep aside. We want to believe that we can do it, and your help must be surreptitious and subterranean if you are a person of goodwill. And the Champaran philosophy is what we must define for ourselves. In the year 2005, the former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, put together 17 individuals in what was then called Our Common Interest. The report on the African Commission. The Prime Minister, he was then the President of the European Union, from which Britain has now left, and he was also the President of the G8 at that time before the exclusion of Russia. They produced the report. Right now, when I see the Blair Institute moving around Africa, they are implementing exactly what was in that particular report, and I have a copy of it, not for the benefit of Africa, but for the benefit of the Institute. And what they have done is to sugarcoat it and camouflage it for the purpose of hoodwinking Africa and for the purposes of creating an environment which benefits foreign companies to the detriment of the continent of Africa. So that some of these engagements are anodinal. They simply lull us into a false sense of security. Do I blame them? No. That is why I agree that we must decolonize all learning. I don't know who said it, that if you have that the happiness of the slave is the comfort of the slave owner. And I am saying that if Africa does not recognize this, then Africa will never recognize and realize our potential. The saying goes that if you behave like grass, goats will eat you. And many times we in the African continent behave like grass, and we are fit for eating. And that is what I'm saying. Going forward in a strategic engagement such as this, it is incumbent upon the continent of Africa. And remember, I said there is a new scramble, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. There was 1 month in this continent when the Russian foreign minister was here, the American foreign minister was here, the Chinese foreign minister was here, the French president was here, the Turkish president was here, within a period of 2 weeks. What were they looking for? What is in their best interest? They engaged little countries. They don't want to engage the East African community. They don't want to engage SADC. They don't want to engage ECOWAS, because when they are big, they are not manipulable. And when on the 14th and 15th days of last year, the African heads of states and government were summoned, and I use the word summoned very deliberately, to Washington, D.C. After the president had spoken to them and given them photo ops, Africa was given 60 billion, 54 countries, 60 billion. And then the American president started engaging in bilateral agreements with Burundi, with Lesotho, with Kenya. That is what we are saying, that going forward we must be conscious. And as to training, our own Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in a book called The River Between, tells his lead character Waiyaki, go unto him, learn what he has taught you, but bring it home and customize it for the benefit of our people. Learning is universal and defies geography, but there is wisdom in using that learning for our benefit. And very lastly, how do we distinguish the institutional conceptual West, which is diabolical, and the individual members of those countries that actually sometimes are on our side? Institutionalized conceptual West, as articulated through government, is fundamentally diabolical. Their pretension to the contrary notwithstanding. And therefore, when we engage with them, we must have our guards up. We are capable, in my view, of discerning who is better, and that is the duty of our leadership. Our leadership doesn't do a good job out of it, and that is why the demand from the civil society, the demand from academia must remind leadership at all times, you are dining, and I'm using this as a term of art, that when you are dining with the devil, you must do so with a long spoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I don't know that you wanted to respond to the issue of definition earlier on, or indeed any comments that you might have.
Let us not drown ourselves in semantics. This is my view with due respect. First of all, let us remember that, and I always warn us Africans, if I was using my mother tongue to define interference, or using a Kiswahili word, what meaning would it carry? And sometimes we find ourselves prisoners of Portuguese, prisoners of French, prisoners of English, or any other colonial language which we have appropriated and which we now deploy in terms of engagement. History has demonstrated, and my good friend Kegoro said it, history has demonstrated not once, not twice, that the intentions appear to be noble in the beginning, but when they have come in like the proverbial Trojan horse, they go beyond their mandate. Show me what is happening to Libya today. Show me what is happening to the Central African Republic. Show me what is happening to Somalia today. They were all well-intentioned, and see the product. A tree shall be judged by its fruit. A mango that says it is an orange is still a mango.
Okay.
Now to the question that I have been asked, that is, what can Africa do, particularly with foreign interference? Let us understand that the international economic architecture, as I see it, is one in which Africa did not participate, does not participate in a meaningful way. Take, for example, the Bretton Woods institution that we know about, the World Bank and the IMF, created in 1944 in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire. British economists and American economists immediately after the World War II to target the reparation of Europe through the Marshall Plan. We are grafted into it, and then we become beholden to them. So that when you hear IMF is in your country, you ought to be very worried, because the prescriptions is one size fits all. And if you doubt me, you will remember the prescriptions of the IMF during the structural adjustment in 1980s. Not a single country came out of it in a proper shape. We are not involved in that architecture. Remember also the WTO. The very first meeting of the United Nations in 1945 in San Francisco had a component of the WTO. The WTO, as we know it today, is also constructed in a manner that does not benefit us. The idea is that Africa continues to remain a producer of primary goods, and we continue to consume goods that have value addition. How then has Africa tried to react to this? There have been several initiatives. The very early initiatives were not even constructed by Africa. If you remember the African Pacific, Caribbean Pacific, the Lomé Convention, and the Cotonou Declaration, these were initiatives which were influenced from outside. It is after the failure of the Lomé Convention that Africa now said, we want to have our own, hence the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980, because Africa recognized trade within Europe is at almost 60%. Trade within North America is at anything 57%. Trade within Asia is at 50%. Trade within Latin America is at 40%. Trade within Africa, 15%. But the Lagos Plan of Action did not realize the dreams that we set for ourselves. So Africa has always identified the solution to our problems. In fact, and the president of the commission, of the chairman commission, will agree with me. If you listen to Kwame Nkrumah when he spoke on 24th day of May 1963, he said, the only way in which we are going to ensure that we survive in this hostile world is to have one government. Perhaps some said he was naive, he was too idealistic, but he could see it. He could see that the smaller we are, the weaker we are in all aspects. He said, even one army, even one foreign policy. He said, and people thought he was naive. In 2013, when we came up with Africa Agenda 2063, and I invite you to read the letter written by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, from whom the president took over. She is apologizing to Kwame Nkrumah. She's saying, we wish we listened to you. So what are we doing as Africa in terms of trying to deal with this foreign interference? Having recognized these, first of all, under the REX, the East African Community, you remember there was the Committee of Fast Tracking of the East African Community and East African Confederation. The first president of East Africa ought to have been sworn in 2010. It did not happen. As I'm talking to you, there is now a body that is moving around trying to create a constitution for the East African Confederacy, which is a realization that if we want to interfere, if we want to stop foreign interference and we want to engage constructively, we must have a big market, and that market will be the East African market. Hence, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Somalis are coming in, and I'm told the Ethiopians are also contemplating. And not only in East Africa, in ECOWAS, there was even an attempt to create a currency called the ECO, which was torpedoed, as you know, by the French. And in SADC, these are ways and means of immunizing ourselves against the machinations of not only Europe, but China. China is increasingly coming into the continent. Russia is increasingly coming into the continent. Turkey is increasingly coming into the continent. Qatar is increasingly coming into the continent. The Emiratis are coming into the continent. So we are seeing all these things happening. But beyond the REX, there is also the African Union. If you read Africa Agenda 2063 and the 7 aspirations, they are designed specifically to ensure that we form a bulwark against these foreign interference. And let me correct myself if I was misunderstood. They are small nations. Let's not delude ourselves. The theory of sovereignty of nations is a fiction. Right now, we will have meeting of the G7. Why? Because they are bigger economies and we are not there. Then we will have the G20, which are slightly bigger. Then they are the smaller nations, and they met recently in Brussels. So we must distinguish the fiction of equality of nations and the reality of nations. And when therefore we want to negotiate at the continent of Africa, we are saying the bigger we are, the better we are. So efforts are there. And as I conclude, I'm saying, if we look at Agenda 2063 and we look at Africa Continental Free Trade Area to eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers, to allow for the free movement of persons, then we would be in a better position to engage. And I'll give this example. Look at East Africa. We said that we did not want second-hand clothing. Rwanda accepted. Then Uganda and Tanzania were persuaded by the United States of America, and we dropped out. This is what divide and rule is all about. So these things that we are talking about, they are not going to be realized in your lifetime. These are intergenerational battles. And our duty, as Nyerere said on the 6th day of March 1997, this generation has a duty to carry the torch. And the worst mistake that we can make is to lose hope and to despair. Thank you.
Now, we have listened to that powerful speech, and I believe there is a lot we honestly have learned and that we already know. We just need to put into strategy. Just a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was the AU CARICOM Summit. That is the African Union and Caribbean Community meeting in Ethiopia, in Africa. And it is a high-level meeting between leaders from the Caribbean and Africa on strategizing the unity of uniting these all Black people. And we need to continue recruiting as many Black people into this fight, into this struggle as possible if we really aim at the liberation of Black people and liberation of Africa for that matter. And I always say, until Africa is liberated, until Africa is respected, that is the only time all Black people across the world shall be respected. You see the disrespect with the many Black people in America, in Europe, in Asia. It's because the motherland of Black people in itself doesn't get the respect it deserves. When Africa gets respected, it won't matter whether you're African American, Afro-European, Afro-Asian, they will begin to respect you. Now, let's run through some of the points we have learned from Brother Professor Pielo Lumumba, or generally from this speech and what he's saying. First of all, there is political unity just beyond speeches. So the high-level summit that was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, 2 weeks ago shouldn't just be another summit of speeches, fancy speeches. It should be actionable with a strategy for the unity. From then, we can have a clear unified strategy. The African Union is supposed to be the voice of the continent, but too often it ends up being just, a mouthpiece, just a talking point. Leaders meet, release statements, then go home to serve national interest. Meanwhile, global powers deal with us one by one. You've heard from Professor Pielo Lumumba. They will come at you not as a block, they will single you out so they can weaken the unity that would be rather hard to deal with as a block. So using the divide and rule tactic that I have always, they implanted in Africa and they continue to maintain and sustain. Imagine if Africa spoke in one voice, how the Pan-Africans and our forefathers of the struggle of Africa and Black liberation have always wanted. Imagine if we spoke in one voice. If trade deals, foreign military bases, and diplomatic alliances were negotiated as a bloc, a united bloc, not as individual states desperate for short-term favors and local directionless competitions. That unity alone would transform how the world will treat us. Now, point number 2 is economic integration. And this is non-negotiable. Africa, we are at a very, very dire place when it comes to economic integration. If you cannot fly from one African country to another, sometimes you have to go to Europe to go back to Africa. That tells you about what is really happening in Africa. So the African continent free trade area was a bold idea, actually. However, to create the largest single market in the world was its intention. But what has it achieved so far? But what is the point of a free trade deal if non-tariff barriers still choke cross-border trade, cross-border traffic? You can't even do business with the most neighboring country. It defeats the sense for having the Africa a unified a continental free trade area. What is free about the trade area? Truck drivers wait at delays for days on end, at border points. Goods rot and companies face endless red tapes. We must cut that kind of nonsense. Standardize customs, remove hidden barriers, and make sure an African product can move from Nairobi in my country to Lagos in Nigeria, from Cairo in Egypt to Cape Town in the southernmost point in Africa. Remove the barriers. And when we talk about moving goods from Nairobi to Lagos, that's Kenya to Nigeria. Cairo to Cape Town, that's Egypt to South Africa. It should be easier to move those goods between those cities than moving goods, from Africa to Europe, Africa to China, Africa to America, It should be like how they move their own goods in Europe, from Berlin to Paris, from London to Paris. That we should learn from what they do and customize that to fit our own purpose and our own benefit. Only then will our economy scale up, attract investment even from them, and keep value here on the continent instead of outside or abroad. And also, let's talk about the raw export of African resources. And this is where the question of value addition comes in. So right now, Africa exports raw materials and imports the finished product from the same raw materials they export outside. Basically, selling cheap and buying exorbitantly expensive. That model is colonial hangover, is neo-colonialism, is strings of colonialism attached. And this is affecting the whole of Africa. If we want power, we must control the value chain. Coffee, cocoa, gold, diamond, cotton should be planted, harvested in Africa, processed and exported as a finished product. Lithium should be mined in the Congo, processed in the Congo, packed in the Congo, and sold to the world markets in form of finished battery products. If we can't do that, copper in Zambia, gold in Burkina Faso, gold in South Africa. There's just, I mean, that's usually a rather emotional point when it comes to what is happening with our resources in Africa. Also, let's talk about financial independence and common tools. Financial independence and common tools. Let's talk money. Africa cannot keep running on IMF, on World Bank, and other loans whenever there is a crisis. We need our own financial backbone, an African monetary fund. If we have to have, and we need to, a stronger regional banks and payment systems that don't rely on the dollar, on the euro, or on the pound. If Asia can settle trade in their own currencies, why can't we in Africa settle our own trades in our own currencies? We should be able to have our own currency, our own standardization to do that. Imagine how much we lose in transaction costs alone if we continue to always transact in foreign currencies. We need a system where African countries trade with each other directly, where our currencies hold value because we give them the value we want to and the value they deserve. And then negotiating with the world from strength, okay, from a point of unity and strength. And now here's the reality: the world will always come to Africa. Yeah, in fact, it is the beginning of it all, for the world to look towards Africa. Everybody is now looking and strategizing towards having some shares in Africa. Everybody, I mean Europe, America, I mean China, Japan, Russia, Turkey. Everybody is, they need our resources, our markets, our young population, but we can approach them as beggars. We must bargain from a point of strength because we have what they want. This means setting terms. You want access to our minerals? Then set up industries here, transfer your technologies to Africa, employ Africans. We want access to our own markets, the markets for our own products. Then open, we can have surplus and give it to the rest of the world. Of course, there will always be surplus. No more, lopsided deals with Africa, where Africa gives everything and, it's left with the leftovers and to get crumbs. unity of purpose and the role of the people is also a very important point here that we are learning. And but unity isn't just about leaders, it's also about us as the people. It's not just about Ibrahim Traore. It's not about PLO Lumumba. It's not even about those that have come before us, Thomas Sankara, the other PLO of Congo, Muammar Gaddafi. Yeah, it's not about Julius Malema alone. It's even about us as the people, civil society, the youth, the diaspora, all of you, Black people outside of the continent of Africa. We have a role. We must pressure our governments to prioritize Africa first and not foreign approval. So that is a problem with the governance in Africa today. They are people's pleasers because they have been put there by a system that demands them to please, to dance to their tunes. And it's time for us to call them out, fire them, send them home, and in fact, send them to jails. Some of them who deserve to be there. We must celebrate African products, support Black businesses, African businesses, and tell our own African and Black stories. Soft power matters because if we control the narrative, we control how the world sees us and how we see ourselves and how we get treated out there. So basically, family, Africa doesn't lack resources. Black people don't lack, resources, the willpower. We don't lack ideas at all. We don't lack manpower. What we lack is coordination. What we lack is unity. What we lack is strategy and the courage to say no when the world tries to exploit us. Okay, basically, the West has a plan. The East has a plan. What is Africa's plan? That should be, the question. Until we come together with a clear economic and political strategy, we will remain the playground for others. But the moment we unite, the world will have no choice, simply no choice, to respect Africa and to respect all Black people. So I beseech all Black people across the world, this is our common fight. Do not be dissuaded, do not be lied to that this doesn't concern you because you're a Caribbean, because you're an African American, because you're Afro-European, Afro-Asian. No, those are strategic ways of dividing us. And as long as we have ourselves divided, they have their field day, of course. Yeah, we've come to the end of this video. I hope you have learned as much as I have, and you have enjoyed. If you did it, then give it this video a thumbs up and share it as well. And we always say, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button to support us and be a part of us. So until next time, I'll see you in the next video.